There is someone making a very important decision about you right now. A decision that is quietly changing the direction of their life in ways you cannot yet see. What I'm about to share may be unfolding inside someone's mind at this very moment. It is happening silently, privately, and much deeper than most people would ever realize. You may not know it, but there is someone whose thoughts return to you far more often than they admit. They replay conversations, moments, expressions, and feelings that were never fully spoken. They revisit these memories again and again, searching for meaning, clarity, and understanding. To everyone around them, everything may seem completely normal. They may appear calm, focused, and unaffected. They continue with their daily responsibilities. They go to work. They spend time with friends. They smile when expected. They carry on as if nothing unusual is happening. But beneath that surface, something much different is taking place. Inside, they are wrestling with emotions that refuse to disappear. Their mind keeps returning to you, even when they try to focus on other things. In quiet moments, when distractions fade and the noise of the day settles, your presence returns to their thoughts. You have become a question they cannot easily answer. They are standing at an emotional crossroads. The choice in front of them feels significant because it is about much more than a relationship. It is about the direction of their future. It is about who they are becoming. They are asking themselves difficult questions. Should they move closer to you, or should they continue keeping their distance? Should they trust what they feel, or continue protecting themselves behind familiar walls? Should they take a chance on something meaningful, or remain in the safety of what they already know? These questions carry weight, because every possible answer comes with consequences. Moving forward requires courage. Stepping back may bring regret. Remaining undecided becomes its own kind of burden. This is why their thoughts keep circling back to you. They are trying to understand what this connection means and what they should do about it. Many people assume that silence means a lack of feeling. In reality, silence often means the opposite. Sometimes people stay quiet because what they feel is too important to express carelessly. Sometimes they remain silent because they fear rejection. Sometimes they stay silent because they are afraid of changing a life that has become familiar, even when that life no longer feels complete. Fear rarely announces itself openly. Instead, it disguises itself as patience. It disguises itself as caution. It disguises itself as uncertainty. It can even disguise itself as indifference. But underneath these appearances, something much deeper is happening. This person feels the pull of your presence. They remember how they felt around you. They remember moments when life seemed clearer, lighter, or more meaningful. When they think about you, they are not simply remembering another person. They are remembering a version of themselves, a version that felt more open, a version that felt more honest, a version that was less guarded and less afraid. That memory has become difficult to ignore. Yet at the same time, another voice speaks inside them. It reminds them of past disappointments. It reminds them of times when trust was broken. It reminds them of moments when vulnerability led to pain. Their mind begins creating reasons to hesitate. It asks whether they are ready. It asks whether they are strong enough. It asks whether they have healed enough from previous wounds. It asks whether they deserve the kind of connection they experienced with you. This creates an inner conflict that grows stronger with time. Part of them wants to move toward what feels real. Another part wants to avoid the risk that comes with opening their heart. They find themselves caught between hope and fear, caught between possibility and self-protection, caught between the desire to grow and the comfort of staying exactly where they are. And whether they fully realize it or not, you have become the center of that struggle. What makes this decision so difficult is that it is not only about love, it is also about transformation. Not every person leaves a lasting mark on someone's life. Many people pass through our lives briefly. They teach a lesson, create a memory, and eventually become part of the past. But some connections are different. Some people arrive and awaken something that has been sleeping for years. They challenge old beliefs without even trying. They reveal hidden fears. They expose dreams that have been pushed aside. They encourage growth simply through their presence. That is what happened here. You did not simply become another person in their story. You became a mirror. You reflected parts of them that they had stopped paying attention to. You revealed strengths they had forgotten. You exposed insecurities they had carefully hidden. You reminded them of possibilities they had almost given up on. That experience changed something inside them. Whether they acknowledge it openly or not, they know they are not exactly the same person they were before you entered their life. Being around you made them feel seen in a way they were not accustomed to. It made them feel understood without needing to explain everything. It made them feel accepted without needing to perform or pretend. Experiences like that leave an imprint. They do not simply disappear because time passes. They do not vanish because circumstances become complicated. They remain beneath the surface, quietly influencing thoughts, feelings, and decisions. That is why memories of you continue returning unexpectedly. A certain place reminds them of you. A conversation brings back an old feeling. A random moment during the day triggers a memory they thought had faded. These memories arrive without invitation, and when they do, they remind this person that what they experienced with you was meaningful. They remind them that some connections cannot be reduced to simple explanations. The deeper truth is that you represented something important. You represented authenticity. You represented emotional honesty. You represented the possibility of something real. For someone who has spent years protecting themselves, that can be both inspiring and terrifying. Real connection requires openness. Openness requires trust. Trust requires vulnerability. And vulnerability asks people to face parts of themselves they would rather avoid. This is where their struggle becomes most intense. They know that choosing this connection would require change. It would require them to let go of certain fears. It would require them to stop hiding behind excuses. It would require them to become more honest with themselves. Growth sounds beautiful in theory. In reality, growth often feels uncomfortable. It challenges old habits. It exposes hidden wounds. It forces people to confront truths they have spent years avoiding. That is exactly where this person finds themselves now. Standing between the person they have been and the person they could become, looking at a future that feels both exciting and uncertain, trying to decide whether they have the courage to step forward, trying to understand whether the risk is worth taking. And through all of this, one truth remains impossible for them to escape. No matter how much they analyze, no matter how much they hesitate, no matter how many reasons they create to delay a decision, their thoughts continue returning to you, because some people enter our lives and leave memories. Others enter our lives and leave transformation. And deep inside, they are beginning to realize that you may have been one of those rare people who changed far more than they ever expected. The truth is that mirrors can be difficult to face, especially when someone is still trying to avoid the parts of themselves they do not fully understand. Many people spend years running from their fears, their wounds, and the truths hidden deep within them. They stay busy, they distract themselves, they convince themselves that what they feel is not important enough to examine. But eventually, something happens. Someone enters their life and reflects back everything they have been avoiding. That is what your presence has done. You became a mirror they cannot easily look away from. And now they find themselves standing face to face with parts of themselves they have spent years trying not to confront. This creates tension. It creates uncertainty. It creates a constant back and forth inside their mind. One moment they imagine moving toward you. They imagine finding the courage to speak openly. They imagine expressing what they truly feel. They imagine choosing honesty instead of avoidance. For a brief moment, everything feels possible. Then fear returns. The familiar voice of self-protection begins speaking again. It tells them that distance is safer. It tells them that silence offers control. It tells them that waiting longer might somehow make everything easier. But deep down, they are beginning to realize something important. Time does not erase meaningful connections. Time simply reveals how important they really are. As the days pass, they notice your absence in unexpected ways. Life continues, but something feels different. Certain moments feel less vibrant. Certain experiences feel less meaningful. Things that once distracted them no longer provide the same comfort. They begin noticing a quiet emptiness where your presence once existed. You were never simply occupying a place in their life. You changed the atmosphere within it. You brought something unique into their world. And now that difference is impossible to ignore. The more they recognize this, the more difficult their decision becomes. Because now another layer of responsibility begins to emerge. The questions they ask themselves become deeper. It is no longer only about what they feel. It becomes about what they are capable of. They begin wondering whether they can truly show up for something meaningful, whether they can remain consistent when life becomes difficult, whether they can stay emotionally available instead of retreating when fear appears, whether they can protect a connection instead of sabotaging it, whether they can choose openness instead of withdrawal. These questions carry weight because they understand something important about you. They understand that you are not someone who thrives in confusion. You are not someone who endlessly waits while another person remains undecided. You are not someone who accepts half-effort disguised as affection. They know that choosing you would require sincerity. It would require action. It would require accountability. Most importantly, it would require growth. That realization is both inspiring and intimidating, Because growth asks people to leave behind old versions of themselves. It asks them to abandon habits that no longer serve them. It asks them to stop repeating the same patterns that have kept them emotionally stuck. Many people reach this point and hesitate, not because they do not care, but because they care deeply. The deeper the connection feels, the greater the responsibility becomes. And responsibility can feel overwhelming when someone is still unsure of their own strength. This is where they find themselves now, standing at the edge of change, looking toward a future that asks more from them than they have ever been willing to give before. Part of them wants to move forward, part of them wants to stay exactly where they are, and that conflict continues every day. At the same time, something else has captured their attention. They have begun noticing changes in you. Perhaps you have not spoken about those changes. Perhaps you have not announced them, but they feel them. Your energy is different now. You seem less focused on chasing answers, less focused on proving your value, less focused on convincing anyone to see what you offer. Instead, you appear more grounded, more centered, more secure within yourself. You seem to be directing your energy toward your own growth, rather than someone else's uncertainty. And that shift affects them more than they expected. Because when someone stops waiting, everything changes. When someone chooses themselves, the balance shifts. The illusion of control disappears. They can no longer assume you will remain exactly where they left you. They can no longer assume that time will stand still. Your life continues moving forward. Your value continues existing, whether they acknowledge it or not. Your growth continues with or without their participation. And seeing that reality forces them to confront their hesitation. The more you embrace your own path, the more visible their indecision becomes. What once felt comfortable now feels dangerous, because they begin imagining possibilities they previously avoided. They imagine you finding happiness elsewhere. They imagine you building a life that no longer includes them. They imagine you choosing peace instead of uncertainty. They imagine you quietly moving on, not with anger, not with resentment, but with acceptance. That possibility creates something they can no longer ignore: urgency. For a long time, they believed there would always be more time, more opportunities, more chances, more tomorrows. Now they are beginning to understand that nothing remains available forever. Some opportunities disappear quietly, not because anyone takes them away, but because they are never acted upon. This realization makes their feelings impossible to dismiss. What once felt theoretical now feels real. What once felt distant now feels immediate. The risk of losing you becomes something they can actually feel. And with that realization comes another truth. Love is not only about emotion. Love is also about responsibility. It is about choosing to show up. It is about choosing honesty. It is about choosing courage when fear would be easier. The more they understand this, the harder it becomes to remain passive. Yet fear still exists. Fear of rejection, fear of vulnerability, fear of failure, fear of being fully seen, fear of not being enough, fear of discovering that what matters most also has the power to hurt the most. Sometimes these fears cause them to freeze. They stop moving. They stop acting. They convince themselves that remaining still is somehow neutral. But deep down, they are starting to recognize that stillness is also a decision. Every day spent avoiding action becomes a choice. Every moment spent delaying the truth becomes a choice. Every opportunity left untouched becomes a choice, and choices always carry consequences. This realization creates another layer of tension, because now they understand that there are risks on both sides. If they move forward, they risk disappointment. If they stay where they are, they risk regret. And slowly, they are beginning to see which burden feels heavier. Pain can heal, disappointment can heal, heartbreak can heal. But regret has a way of lingering. It returns in quiet moments. It appears in unanswered questions. It survives in memories of what might have been. That is why your presence continues occupying their thoughts. That is why distractions fail to replace what they felt. That is why silence brings discomfort instead of relief. Because through this experience, they are learning something they can no longer ignore. A life built entirely around safety eventually feels empty. Comfort without connection becomes hollow. Protection without vulnerability becomes isolation. And avoidance never creates peace. It only delays truth. The question inside them is changing. It is no longer about whether feelings exist. The feelings have already made themselves known. Now the question is whether they possess the courage to honor those feelings. And while all of this unfolds within them, your role remains unchanged. You are not responsible for carrying their uncertainty. You are not responsible for proving your worth. You are not responsible for convincing them to see what is already in front of them. Your responsibility is to yourself, to your growth, to your peace, to your future. The more you embrace your own value, the clearer everything becomes. Either they gather the courage to meet you where you stand, or they step aside and allow your journey to continue without them. Both outcomes create growth. Both outcomes move life forward. Both outcomes bring clarity. Because the most important transformation is not happening inside their world alone, it is happening inside yours. And that transformation is becoming impossible for anyone to ignore. As you continue moving forward, something important begins to happen. The possibility of your moving on becomes real, not as a threat, not as a strategy, not as a way to provoke a reaction, but as a natural result of choosing yourself. What once felt distant now feels possible. What once felt unimaginable now feels increasingly likely. And that reality begins to change everything. While they remain caught between fear and courage, you continue walking your own path. You continue growing. You continue healing. You continue building a life that reflects your values, your self-respect, and your vision for the future. Each choice you make strengthens your foundation. Each boundary you maintain reinforces your worth. Each step forward creates greater alignment between who you are and who you are becoming. Whether they move toward you or away from you, your life continues, and there is power in that. A quiet power, a steady power, a power that comes from no longer needing someone else's decision to determine your value. This is the shift that changes everything. Your worth is no longer waiting for their approval. Your future is no longer suspended by their uncertainty. Their reflection, hesitation, and eventual decision become secondary. The most important decision has already been made. You chose yourself, and when someone truly chooses themselves, their energy changes. They stop negotiating their value. They stop shrinking their needs. They stop abandoning their truth to make others comfortable. That change becomes visible. People feel it even when nothing is said. They sense the confidence. They sense the stability. They sense the self-respect. And in response, respect grows. Desire grows. Longing grows. Not because you are trying harder, but because you are no longer chasing what should arrive willingly. The tension that once felt confusing begins to reveal its true purpose. Clarity starts replacing uncertainty. What once felt tangled begins to separate into truth. And the next step no longer belongs to you. It belongs to them. You have already moved. You have already done the difficult work. You have already stepped into growth. Patience does not mean abandoning yourself. Love does not require putting your life on hold. Understanding someone else's fears does not mean tolerating endless confusion. You are not here to remain frozen while another person decides whether they are ready. You are here to live. You are here to grow. You are here to create a life that feels meaningful, whether someone joins you or not. Every action you take sends a message. Every boundary you maintain communicates self-respect. Every moment you refuse to settle for less reinforces your value. When someone realizes your energy is no longer revolving around their indecision, something shifts inside them. Not because you became distant, not because you became cold, but because you became aligned. They begin to feel the reality of your movement. They recognize that life will not wait forever. They recognize that opportunities are not guaranteed. And they begin to understand that your future cannot remain paused while they continue negotiating with fear. This is often the moment when people are forced to make a choice. Not because they are afraid of being alone, but because they finally understand what they stand to lose. At that point, there are only two paths. They step forward with honesty, or they step back with acceptance. They move toward the connection with courage and accountability, or they release it with dignity. What rarely survives is the endless middle ground. Eventually, life asks for clarity. Eventually, reality demands truth, and truth always reveals itself. Not as punishment, not as reward, but as alignment. Connections that are meant to grow find strength through honesty. Connections that resist growth often fall apart under the weight of avoidance. Neither outcome is wrong. Both carry lessons. Both create movement. Both serve growth. Even now, momentum is building quietly, internally, almost invisibly. A resolution is forming. Soon, it may appear as a conversation, a message, a confession, a decision, or even a silence that finally communicates what words never could. Until then, your most powerful choice is simple. Remain anchored in your worth. Remain connected to your truth. Remain committed to your own evolution. The moment you stop questioning your value, life begins responding differently. Pressure starts building inside them. Not through force, not through manipulation, but through awareness. When a decision remains unresolved for too long, life begins demanding honesty. Memories return unexpectedly. Nostalgia appears without warning. Emotions rise to the surface. Thoughts become harder to ignore. A growing voice inside them begins insisting on truth. The distractions that once worked lose their power. Avoidance becomes exhausting. Silence becomes uncomfortable. The weight they have been carrying becomes impossible to dismiss. Slowly they begin recognizing something they have resisted for a long time. Indecision is not protecting them. It is draining them. The longer they postpone the truth, the heavier everything becomes. Old habits reveal themselves. The habit of retreating when something feels real. The habit of analyzing emotions instead of feeling them. The habit of delaying vulnerability in the hope that certainty will arrive first. Now those patterns are impossible to ignore. And with awareness comes responsibility. Because they begin understanding that these patterns affect more than this connection. They affect every area of life, every relationship, every opportunity for growth. That is why this connection has become so significant. You are no longer simply a person they met. You have become a turning point, a crossroads. One path leads toward growth, the other leads toward repetition. One path requires courage, the other requires avoidance. One path expands life, the other keeps everything the same. Deep down they know the difference, and that awareness changes everything. The fears they have carried become visible. Fear of intimacy, fear of rejection, fear of inadequacy, fear of being completely seen. You illuminated these fears simply by being yourself. You became a mirror, reflecting both their potential and their limitations. And mirrors cannot be ignored forever. Eventually, they demand honesty. The choice before them is no longer superficial. It is no longer simply about romance. It has become a question of identity, a question of who they want to be. They find themselves confronting deeper truths, whether they are living from fear or authenticity, whether they are choosing comfort or integrity, whether they are avoiding pain or avoiding growth. There is no neutral position anymore. Every direction carries meaning. At the same time, your own energy continues changing. You are no longer waiting with expectation. You are no longer measuring your worth through someone else's actions. You have chosen alignment. You have chosen peace. You have chosen movement. Your energy reflects confidence, stability, and self-direction. You are no longer watching life happen. You are participating in it. You are no longer hoping. You are becoming. That shift changes the emotional atmosphere around everything. When someone realizes they can no longer access your presence through passive waiting, urgency appears. The illusion of unlimited time disappears. The realization becomes clear. If they want a place in your life, courage is required. Honesty is required. Presence is required. Half measures no longer work. Ambiguity no longer works. Reality demands clarity. At this point, resistance either breaks apart or becomes permanent. Some people rise to the challenge. They choose courage despite fear. They choose honesty despite uncertainty. They accept vulnerability because they understand that avoidance carries its own cost. Others retreat, not because they lack feelings, but because transformation requires effort they are not yet ready to make. Either way, truth emerges.